I wish to preface this by simply stating for the record, this has been a very intriguing, fascinating journey and fascinating trial all the way along as it concerns the Alex Murdaugh saga overall. However, very soon the jury is going to be visiting the actual criminal crime scene with photographs and every single aspect, essentially, of this scene directly in front of them, right up front. And so I feel it's very important to point out some key factors. The way that this thing has been going, there's always kind of the element that could swing in any direction at certain times. I do feel, though, it's finally leaning towards, and I'm of the view, most certainly, that Alex Murdaugh was there at the kennels after 9 p.m. and therefore he shot Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. But the key element that I'm going over in this video in specific, that I want everybody to make sure to make note of and start making real noise about. I feel this is a critical element that everyone has been overlooking, okay? Is the fact that there was this whole analogy of the two-shooter theory, okay? Two shooters that would have come into the feed room, essentially, that's directly by the kennels in the way that they describe it. And because of certain residue, because of certain bullet casings, because of certain forensics on those casings found in the floor, even certain areas they testified in this actual ceiling, they put forward a very interesting theory that there could have been two shooters. But I wanted to address this the entire time, ever since it first came up, because I just can't see it being feasible, okay, being a plausible scenario that there was actually these two shooters because of one key factor and key detail. And I'm going to be reading out the actual official report and the investigative report to go over this detail. But that is, there were stifling, elements of stifling, all the way along in the forearm and in the other upper arm positions for Paul Murdaugh, and then also for Maggie Murdaugh in the same exact literal sense. And because of this key issue, it's indicating certain things, and this is why I needed to address this in the video. It's indicating certain things, folks, with the trajectory of the bullet itself. And if the bullet truly was blasted, just as any other gun is blasted, the simple way that they've described it, there wouldn't be these anomalies. That's what I'm pointing out. The trajectory of the bullet had to have been angled. It had to have been shot at an angle with the kind of caliber of the casings that they're speaking of to be able to produce the stifling that is seen and then confirmed by the forensic pathologist. It's the way I'm going to describe it. And so, again, stifling is one of the most key details throughout this entire trial that's gone on since the investigation began. And I'm going to be addressing this because I feel very strongly now. It is clear cut that the shot, the trajectory of the bullet itself could not have been just something that came across, straight across or anything in a parallel kind of manner. It had to, because of the way certain bullet casings were found and because of the way certain issues are found in this crime scene, it had to have been angled. And an angled shot that's pointing at a specific direction at an angle, okay, must mean, it would have to mean, that Alex Murdaugh was holding that gun. That's what I'm saying here. It doesn't mean that he was holding both guns at the same time. It means he was holding the firearm at a specific time and making a direct angled shot. And that means direct angle, diagonal, at an angle, in other words. And I'm going to be demonstrating some of that when I go over that report, and I'm going to compare it to the forensic pathologist report as well. Thank you. Never forget, key terms, the key terms that have been there all the way along, like stifling, are the key to this case. 16 of the Alex Murdaugh double homicide trial started off with tedious mourning that was filled with scientific DNA, testimony, and discoveries, followed by a graphic and chilling testimony from the forensic pathologist who autopsied both of the bodies. Dr. Ellen Reamer, a forensic pathologist with the official Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, autopsied both victims on June 10, 2021, 3 days after they were shot. And so I went back and I reviewed some of the specific schematics that were done by Miss Reamer to reach her conclusions. And it makes it 100% crystal clear to me that the victims suffered some wounds that were at a kind of a angle, so they were diagonal. One was arcing up at kind of an angle that was what you would expect in an angled shot that takes the form of what you see on a triangle. The other one was angled at a slope. And so neither shot were directly next to the head, or really could have been placed directly next to the head and cranial cavity, as Dr. Eisenstat had pointed out. And so that's why I wish to go ahead and look at the research on it and examine it closer. But what are your thoughts? What are your feelings on the interesting autopsy report that was released in the Murdaugh trial? Sound off in the comments below. Let me know what you feel, what you feel about this and how you are seeing it for yourselves. Dr. Reamer described the injuries of both victims as severe, catastrophic, and fatal. The evidence presented brought no surprise. Paul was shot twice with a shotgun and Maggie multiple times with a long rifle. But the full extent of their injuries was not fully known until now. Paul was shot at less than 3 feet away, so close that the plastic shotgun wad was embedded in the skin. And also, of course, the skillet. The stifling that was found in his forearm, as the first shot sent pellets into the left side of the chest. The wound would not have been fatal, said Reamer, and abrasions and exit wounds of the pellets indicated his arms were down and not a defensive position at the time. The second shotgun blast, which was considered the coup de grace, skipped over the top of the left shoulder into the neckline near the collarbone and through the base of the brainstem before blasting an exit wound in the right side of his head. A small portion was left attached to the stem. His brain arrived for autopsy in a separate container that they conducted more forensics. During this gruesome testimony, which included autopsy photos that were sealed by the court from the public, one juror clutched her mouth and appeared very shaken by the result. Murdaugh did not look at the pathologist during her testimony, instead facing straight ahead and rocking slightly. The forensic expert testified that Maggie was shot 5 times after this, but added that 2 of the wounds could have been from the same projectile. She was shot through the abdomen and thigh from the front at a close range of roughly 3 feet, based on gunshot stippling and the burn marks. One of those shots entered her abdomen, pancreas, and the left kidney. So based upon results that are coming directly from the autopsy, the official autopsy that was conducted, and then what they had to do also with Paul's Paul's brain to a certain extent, it's impossible for the types of angles of shooting ideas that Dr. Eisenstat put forward. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of this. But sound off. What are your feelings? And what are your personal thoughts? Thank you again. All right, so the feed room, part 2. Dr. Jonathan Eisenstat. Earlier, you testified that you believe the fatal shot came from the top of Paul's head and traveled downward in a downslope trajectory, contradicting the state's expert findings that the shot traveled up and through the cranial area, or the cranial cavity, meaning of the head. Now, earlier, you actually presented something that was a bit contrary to that when you were testifying and speaking in this trial more as a background witness, and you had indicated in your original findings that if it was indeed the type of shot that is in question here, or that would be seen on location at this crime scene the way is indicated, it would clearly show the same pattern that you would see when a watermelon is hit. Something to that effect. There would be a lot of blowout. There would be actual, pieces of possible bone. There would be a lot more indicated across the entire feed room, right? Rather than just seeing it here on certain areas of the floor, perhaps a little on the ceiling and so on. If it was truly as you claim it was, which is a shotgun blast essentially to the cranium area or the back of the cranial cavity, then most certainly, according to even some of your original findings in earlier reports, interestingly enough, it would show and display this material, perhaps across the feed room in different areas, okay? So that's an important factor I wanted to make sure got put forth up front and included in the analysis when I'm reading through your whole report. You stated that Good presented earlier photos, where you had Good present these earlier photos of the crime scene, which show biological material at the top of the doorway Paul was shot directly next to. Good also showed the jury photos of blood coating a series of elevated shelves in the Moselle kennel and the feed room. Good suggested the blood splatter would not have been in such elevated areas, according to your own words, if the shot traveled downward in a downward trajectory. Jonathan Eisenstat testified that the fluids could have traveled that way due to blowback from the gunfire. Okay, so here again, I will ask the rest of the audience, and of course our returning subscribers, because they've been very dedicated to this whole issue since day one, are you truly a forensic pathologist? It says here in the documentation that you've done a lot of pathologist consultancy or consultant work with the state of Georgia. It doesn't show here that you have examined really many kind of live situations with bodies and so on, the bodies in the bags. Would that be a fair assessment to make? It says more here on your background and characteristics that you are a forensic pathology consultant, okay? Just attempting to be positive and get everything, always on record and very accurate here, okay? But that doesn't indicate much more than what it says in the documentation. So again, I would ask Dr. Jonathan Eisenstat, and I would ask others who are perhaps pushing this forward a lot, how many actual homicide cases have you encountered? And how many bodies have you actually fully examined? You stated in your own words it would show clearly this exact line of characteristics for the actual material that was found in the feed room and so on. If it was two shooters and they were being shot from different points of view or different vantage points. Again, I asked a simple question. Officially, how many full-fledged homicide cases have you yourself worked on thus far? Because that would certainly change the characteristics of a lot of different crime scenes, if what you are saying is 100% true. You had also spoken about the fact that normally there should be a lot more, what's the word? Blood. Material, blood, or otherwise debris found in an area such as the feed room if it was actually a full shotgun shot, or in other words, being shot with the shotgun from the cranial area as indicated in your actual report. If that was in fact the case, according to this evidence report, there should be a lot more material, probably near the walls of the feed room and in a lot of different areas inside the main hall due to the amount of blowback effect. Again, I stipulate, and again, I reiterate, these are your own words. You say that you felt the shot came from the top of Paul's head and traveled downward. You had a similar report in regards to Maggie Murdaugh. Again, based upon the evidence in autopsy results and also the paper that I've studied regarding forensic pathology as well, this could not be at all the case. Okay? Because stifling, which is actual marks from the firearm, is found in the upper forearm area, also the shoulder area and shoulder blade apparently, and even other areas of the main chest. And the stifling itself essentially proves, nearly straight across, just proves the fact that these shots could not have come from a direct shotgun blast to the back of the head. There's too many inconsistencies in the arena of stifling in specific, and also where these shots end up appearing within the feed room, within that main area. There's some that show up on the floor, there's a few that show up above, okay? But they do not show up in a required pattern that you would see when a blast of that magnitude occurs inside an area that's very, very enclosed, such as what's seen there at the Moselle property. It's very closed off. Not many people can fit inside the room in specific being mentioned. And in a scenario like that, even your earlier findings agree, Dr. Eisenstat, that there should be material as well as likely blood and other particular items found all the way across that feed room in different proximities. If is the key word. The shotgun blast occurred directly through the back of the head, as they keep on claiming. Again, timing-wise, this does not leave any room for the trajectory of bullets that are being described. And I'm sure viewers here and otherwise will certainly agree with that conclusion that they do not show the trajectory of bullets that are being described. Again, as you watch this video, you see also evidence of the fact that some of the bullets conclusively were shot directly at an angle. It appeared, especially based on this report, to be a downward slope style angle, meaning directly pointed towards the ground, as though the victim was staring at the ground. If, as Dr. Jonathan Eisenstat has stated before in his ideas and his previous report, essentially, the shotgun blast came in the back of the neck or the back of the cranial area, there should be direct evidence of stippling and other key mentionables directly all throughout that whole area of the body. I again request and ask for the credentials of Dr. Jonathan as far as how many individual autopsies maybe he has done overall or seen of actual real human bodies. Certainly, as everyone will point out here over and over, when discussing these types of serious issues, human beings are much, much different than any type of experiment, watermelons or otherwise. When they are shot, specific things occur within the body and on the outside surfaces, as shown in many, many countless examples in the crime scenes on this channel. So I'm not buying the analysis that there was definitely two shooters or could have been two shooters. Based upon your personal report, Dr. Jonathan. Because again, it does not lend any real answers to the amount of stippling and other key components that were found in the bodies within the very short amount of time that each of these homicides occur. So thank you again. I hereby rebut the idea of the two shooters. I think that that's an interesting analogy sometimes that people explore, but when lining it up against the actual facts and reading from the autopsy, I do not see it at all being a possibility of two shooters having done the exact trajectory and the dynamics of the bullets that were found here at this crime scene. And that's the key element to want all of you guys to, be discussing and thinking about. What are your thoughts? How do you feel about the report by Dr. Jonathan Eisenstat? Did he really know exactly what he was talking about at the time? Or could he have possibly leapt way before he needed to leap into something here? Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your comments and ideas right down below. And let everyone know, to this date, what you think about the testimony of Dr. Eisenstat and also his other expert about whether or not there was any more than most likely the one shooter, I will say that, one shooter inside the feed room that night. Thank you. What I mean, folks, this is what's known as position 4, where the trajectory of the bullet was found and where it was issued from. There's more about this. I'm not going to play the presentation right now, but there's more in the description box if you'd like to check this out and find out more of exactly how this occurs. So position 4 indicates that the bullet trajectory came directly at an arced angle, basically a slope in the case of Maggie Murdaugh. And in the case of Paul Murdaugh, it came a little bit differently. But this is the key item here. Item 7 is a 10 to the 6th degree, essentially, angle. The bullet strikes into the gravel in the dirt. And as it concerns Paul, it's a bit different because the bullet actually strikes into the inner chamber, inner area, other side of the coop, and the other area of the feed room. But in both cases, the bullet is coming directly at a specific angle, and it is not next to the skin, meaning somebody didn't press the chamber of the gun directly next to the back of the head or the front of the chest or anything like that in both scenarios. So this disproves any of the findings by Dr. Eisenstat. I'm going to show one other issue from this. Next. It proves Dr. Eisenstat's findings in the report. It shows that the bullet trajectory had to have come from an arced angle, and the arced angle would have come from the ground going upwards. So I thank you again for allowing this presentation. You can find out more about the full presentation in the description of this video, but this is kind of a snapshot from that. It shows the entry chest wound from the chest cavity, exits through the back, and the entry left arm has an official passage through the throat. So therefore there was never any kind of firearm or gun pressed against Paul Murdaugh at the back of the head or anything of the sort. This shows the actual trajectory for the bullets at the time when they were fired. Thank you. Dr. Eisenstat presented an interesting case, as did his other witness, actually, who came right on board. I never rule out there being interesting possibilities in a crime scene. I just don't see it happening, however, in this particular case. Things are always interesting in double homicides. I, however, do not see anything leading towards that conclusion in this particular instance. The amount of stifling that should be found or must be found in the forearms and upper neck regions, particularly around the shoulder or shoulder blades, do not lend any support to this idea. The debris found near the shoulders and other areas of the neckline lends more support essentially to the reality that they were shot by someone wielding two weapons or two guns. That's exactly it. Taking into account the exact time, because this takes place in the feed room, so the exact time needed, it would have not been possible to complete this shooting with the two shooters Dr. Eisenstat suggests. As was specified under the exact words offered by Dr. Jonathan Eisenstat in his first original report, I do not see evidence that could back up this analogy. Again, this was most certainly one shooter who very clearly was Alex Murdaugh, is what I'll say about this. Yet there is a lot more interesting issues to explore around this very dynamic result, because there's always mysteries out there, folks. So sound off in the comments below on what you think and have felt about this situation since Dr. Eisenstat brought it up. There's more to understand. So how do you feel about the amount of evidence and the issues that have been seen and discovered in the feed room as demonstrated in the example. And what do you feel about the ballistics for the shell casings themselves? Do you agree or disagree, perhaps, in regards to how the shell casings show up? The way that they've been demonstrated so far most certainly lends a lot more support to the conclusion that this could not have been a shotgun blast that would just randomly occur at the back of someone's neck. There's always interesting things to study, however. I've always concluded it really could not have been possible, given where the actual shell casings are found and where they get lodged in. It could therefore be observed that this was not anything of the two shooters that are basically put forward by Dr. Eisenstat. Rather, this sounds very clearly, based upon exactly where the shell casings are found, to be one shooter holding two guns, who's none other than Alex Murdaugh. And that's based upon first-hand evidence, because I love to go with evidence, including the reports that are observed earlier, as well as original reporting and documentation presented by the group that represents Dr. Eisenstat's findings. Again, every single homicide or crime scene is different than the next, folks. They really are. No two are the same. However, that certainly doesn't suggest you can just throw in whatever Hail Mary idea that comes your way, for example. This idea of two shooters that instantly get in and out seems like that exact type of analogy. Bringing in multiple shooters in that short of a time span, when there isn't that time that's needed to get in and out of such a small enclosed area like the feed room, certainly doesn't lend any support to the rest of this conclusion. So I would safely have to say, once again, Alex Murdaugh was definitely there, and he was who held the two guns in his hands, most certainly. However, what are your thoughts and what are your feelings on this case and the trial overall? Thank you. Sound off in the comments with more of your insights and ideas that you're having down below.